Once outside of Scully's office, Mulder leaned against the wall. Arms folded, he uttered a small dejected sigh and closed his eyes. Why did it always have to be so difficult? He loved Dana Scully deeply, but more often than not wished she could try to be on his side when it came to understanding events that didn't have a place in the so-called real world. Although he knew deep down underneath all that stubborn behaviour, she believed in the unknown just as much as him, but preferred to ignore the truth, mainly because she was afraid to face it. And even though he personally couldn't fathom out her reasoning, it was still her choice to make, and he shouldn't forget that. Feeling rather light-headed through lack of sustenance, and not wishing to make the drive back to their home just yet, in case he passed out at the wheel of his car, he decided to make his way to the canteen for something to eat. He knew where it resided in the building, as he had visited it on several occasions since Scully had started working here. Paying no attention to the cashier as he gave her the correct amount of money for a beef salad baguette and coffee in a styrofoam cup, he found a free table near the centre of the room and seated himself. Time seemed to stand still in the space he now occupied, whilst all around him various people from different walks of life went on about their busy lives in the hospital, and he suddenly felt like an outcast, thrust into the middle of this chaotic hustle and bustle. He would never fit in with these folk, because he just wasn't cut out to exist in this way. His partner seemed to have settled into this normality, claiming it was how she wanted to live her life nowadays. He knew even if she kept on refusing to admit it to herself, that she would never completely be a part of everyday life either. How could she be, after witnessing past experiences that defied any rational explanation? Furthermore, they were both equally aware of the nightmares yet to come, looming just over the horizon. And when that proverbial shit hit the fan, every man, woman and child on the planet would be affected by the impact. Everything these people ever held sacred would be completely turned on its head, and even normality would lose all meaning for them. Maybe then he wouldn't feel so much of a loner. A selfish way of looking at the impending outcome, he thought. But Mulder realised he would become the centre of attention, where everyone would be made fully aware of his important role in life, to try and prevent the devastation which would eventually bring about the complete extinction of mankind. Looking around the room at this present moment, though, he felt no one in this building knew him, or what he was thinking or going through. No one except Scully. No matter what, she would stand at his side, and should he fall, would be there to catch him. Remaining submerged in his thoughts, Mulder opened the folder he had become attached to and began browsing through the printed sheets for the umpteenth time. He wasn't even aware when someone spoke to him. "Do you mind if I sit here?" Receiving no response from the gentleman seated at the table, Naomi tried again. "Excuse me?" Mulder replied, startled out of his deep contemplation. Looking up, he saw a very petite Japanese woman struggling with a tray of food in her hands. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but this seems to be the only table left that has some spare room." Becoming aware of the plight this young lady was in, he felt rather embarrassed by his lack of response beforehand. "Where are my manners?" he said, taking the tray from her and placing it on the table. "Of course you can sit here. I'm sorry I didn't realize you were there. Will you please forgive me?" "No problem, and thank you," Naomi replied, sitting down opposite him. "Looks like some interesting reading you've got there," she said, indicating the piles of papers he had strewn out in front of him. Mulder shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe for the minority." She offered a hand in his direction. "Hi, I'm Naomi," she said shyly. "Fox Mulder," he replied, returning the handshake, then quickly added, "Please call me Mulder." "Hello, Mr. Mulder," she said politely. "Mulder will be just fine," he added, smiling at her. She blushed slightly and then decided to give her full identity to him. "In that case, I'm Naomi Hanako." "That's a beautiful name." She felt her cheeks turn a darker shade of pink once more and returned a timid smile. "Thank you. It means flower child. My surname, that is," she told him. "Very pretty. So what does your first name mean?" he asked, showing an interest. Honest and beautiful," she replied, rather embarrassed. "Well, they're the Japanese terms for it anyhow." "Don't suppose you have a Japanese term for Mulder?" he asked with a chuckle. "Not that I know of," she replied with a grin, finding herself unable to take her eyes off him. Only a few minutes had passed by since meeting this rather charming man, and yet she was starting to feel at ease. This rarely happened in her life. In fact, the only other time it had occurred was with the guy she'd ended up engaged to. A wave of sadness washed over her when she remembered how he'd taken his own life, yet she'd never understood why, as they'd seemed so happy together. Suddenly she realized she'd been staring at this stranger for a good while. "Oh, I'm sorry," she apologized. "That's okay," Mulder replied, wondering why she'd been finding him so fascinating. Then he sensed a sudden change of mood. "Are you all right?" he asked her. Finding it rather comforting that this man was showing concern for her, she nodded briefly. "I'm fine, really." She didn't wish to reveal her past to a complete stranger, even if he was a handsome one at that. Deciding to change the subject, she pointed to his paperwork. "I really shouldn't have stopped you from working. Are you a doctor here?" "Oh my, no," Mulder replied, amused that anyone could possibly think he was in the medical profession. He returned the question in her direction. "Do you work here?" "Yes, I'm a physician's assistant," Naomi replied. "I only started work at this hospital today, but I guess I'm finding my feet. My cousin is a heart surgeon who's been working here for about 5 years now." "And you're working with him?" "No, I've been placed with a neurosurgeon, Scully. I mean, her name is Dr. Dana Scully." Mulder almost choked on his coffee on hearing her words. "You're kidding me," he said, startled. "You know her?" "Yeah, she's my girlfriend," Mulder explained. "Oh," Naomi said, surprised. She also couldn't help feeling a little disheartened. But wasn't that always the way things turned out? You find an attractive man to talk to and then discover he's spoken for, not to mention that there were a fair number of years between them, so even if Mulder had been single, he more than likely wouldn't have had his heart set on dating someone old enough to be his daughter. But still, a girl can dream, can't she? He couldn't help but notice how she was trying to hide her obvious attraction for him, and he smiled. "Sorry to disappoint you." Naomi felt incredibly embarrassed and blushed fiercely. Getting up from her seat, she went to grab her tray, intending on leaving immediately before she made a fool of herself any further. "I'm sorry," she said hurriedly. "Hey, there's no need to go," Mulder exclaimed. He had to admit to himself he'd been rather enjoying her company. "We can still be friends, can't we?" Unable to resist his invitation for her to stay, she sat back down and quietly started eating some of the food she'd bought. "So what does Scully think of you as her assistant?" he asked inquiringly. Naomi carried on eating and took a sip of Coke before swallowing. "I think she likes me." "You must be very good at what you do, then." She knew he was only being polite, but couldn't help being flattered by his kindness. "I guess," she replied. Trying to turn the conversation around, she added, "So what are you working on?" Noticing his smile turning into a frown, she felt awkward once more. "I shouldn't have been so nosy. It's really none of my business." "Oh, it's not you," he said quickly. "It's just that I don't think you'll find any of it interesting." She sensed a hidden sadness in his voice that made her warm to him even more. "Try me," she said gently. Mulder shrugged, then reluctantly offered her one of the loose pages, at the same time thinking once she'd read it she'd probably make up some excuse to leave, having now discovered that the man she was talking to was a complete nutcase. Still he watched her, and it was then that he really noticed how beautiful she was and how fragile she seemed. Puccini's opera came to mind, and he thought she did indeed remind him of Madame Butterfly. "This is really interesting," Naomi said, returning the page to him. "I find these myths and folklores fascinating." That was the last thing he'd expected her to say, and it took him by surprise. "You do?" "Sure. Do you mind if I read some more of this?" "Help yourself," he said, offering her the rest of the pages. Sipping his coffee, Mulder listened to her own views on these myths, and how she'd shown an interest in the paranormal since being a little girl back in Japan. How she'd always been very open-minded on the subject. Fox Mulder couldn't believe he'd found a kindred spirit in this young woman, and it felt such a relief, after all the recent negativity he'd faced from the FBI, his ex-boss Skinner, and yes, even Scully. He'd also felt such compassion when she explained that while she was in Japan, she'd been betrothed to a man who, without warning, had killed himself, and how her sister had died that same year. Then, unable to deal with the loss, she'd ended up having a nervous breakdown. Suddenly Mulder wished he hadn't given her this material that had obviously dredged up some very painful memories. "Naomi, I'm really very sorry you've had to face these tragedies in such short a time," he said, genuinely upset for her. Once he'd gathered up the papers and put them back in the folder, he took hold of her hand. "I shouldn't have shown you this." "You couldn't have known about my past," she told him. The concern he was revealing made her heart beat faster, and she knew if she didn't get a hold of herself, she might lean over and kiss him. Pulling gently from his grasp, she caught her breath and steadied herself by returning the conversation to the paranormal. "So maybe Bloody Mary killed my sister and fiancé?" she questioned him. Mulder wanted to tell her yes, without a doubt, it was this evil spirit that was responsible. But thanks to Scully, he'd learned over the years how important it was to gather as much factual evidence as you could before accepting anything as the truth. "Perhaps," he said softly. "I must say," she began, smiling, "it's nice to find someone else who is interested in the supernatural." Mulder grinned on hearing this. Interested? If only she knew how he'd spent years investigating such phenomena for the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C., but he wasn't sure he wanted to tell her all about the X-Files just yet. Maybe because it was still too painful to accept that they didn't exist anymore, because those bastards had snatched them from him, and most likely burnt them for good this time. A memory formed where he and Scully had witnessed the office gutted by a fire, which he came to realise his father, the smoking man, had set deliberately. "I said it's really great that I found someone who is a believer," she tried again. "Sorry," he said, snapping out of his reverie. "You wouldn't believe how pleased I am to hear you say that," he admitted. The conversation carried on for a good few hours, but to Mulder and Naomi it had felt like a microsecond. Both of them discovered they had an even deeper connection that spanned from their strong interest in the paranormal, or perhaps they'd known one another in another life. Whatever the reasons, so lost in conversation were they, that both were not even aware of time passing until Mulder decided to glance at his watch, and then realised just how late it was. He also noticed the canteen had closed long ago and everyone else had left. "Oops," he exclaimed. "Guess we got a little carried away." Glancing around the empty room, he indicated to Naomi that they were now alone. "Oh, no," she said, worried. "I was supposed to take these patients' details to Dr. Scully." "Well, she didn't beep you, so I guess you're in the clear," Mulder replied. "Pardon?" Naomi asked, a puzzled look on her face. "I mean she didn't page you," he said, pointing towards the little communication device attached to her uniform. "Oh," she replied, laughing. "I guess I'd better get these to her, though." As she rose from the table, she knew she really didn't want to leave him. "I'll come with you if you like." It was almost as if he'd read her thoughts when she heard his reply. "Okay." Then she checked her watch and frowned when she noticed just how late it was. "I've just missed the last bus home," she said, rather frustrated. "I could give you a lift," Mulder replied, without realising exactly what he'd said. "It's only about a quarter of an hour's drive from here. I can always take a taxi." "Are you sure you don't mind?" she asked, unsure as to whether she'd heard him correctly. Okay, just what possessed him to say that? He'd planned to return home and wait patiently for Scully. She had her own car, so she didn't need his assistance in that department. Just how much longer she was going to be working, though, he had no idea, but thought he'd better go and see her before taking Naomi home. "It's no problem," Mulder said, rising from his seat. "But yeah, I'll come with you. First I need to let Scully know I'm giving you a lift." They had just reached the office door when a nurse cornered him. "You can't go in there. Dr. Scully is having a meeting with Dr. Holmes, the heart surgeon." "Shelley, come on, it's me, your other half," Mulder said, hoping that would give him access. "And Mike is my cousin," Naomi piped up. "I'm sure it will be okay." "I'm sorry, Fox, but I've had explicit instructions not to allow anyone in there," Shelley replied. Mulder bristled on hearing her use his Christian name. "Fine. Could you just let her know I'm heading home, then?" he asked, feeling a little frustrated. He was going to call her later on his cell phone anyway, which he realised to his dismay he'd accidentally left in the car. "Sure, Fox." Again with a first name, Shelley. He hated it when anyone called him by this, and he knew Scully had told her not to on numerous occasions. "Sorry, Mulder," she apologised. "Yeah, I'll let her know." "Thank you," he replied. Naomi also had a question for her. "Please can you give this to Dr. Scully? It's regarding one of her patients," she said politely, handing the nurse the document she'd brought with her. "Of course," Shelley replied. "I'll give this to her as soon as she's finished with the meeting." Naomi gave a little nod of her head as a gesture of thanks. Together she and Mulder headed out of the building and over to the parking lot. When they reached his Taurus, he opened the door to the passenger side and politely held it for her while she got into the vehicle. Climbing into the driver's seat, he retrieved his phone from the glove compartment. Punching in the numbers, he was unpleasantly surprised when a recorded message explained that Scully's phone was currently switched off.
You have reached the voicemail box of
Dana Scully.
At the tone, please record your voice message. When you are finished recording, you may hang up or press pound for more options.
On top of that, the battery was extremely close to giving up the ghost, so he couldn't even leave a voicemail message. "Just great," he exclaimed angrily. "What's wrong?" Naomi asked him. "I can't get a hold of her," he replied, frustrated. "And the phone's almost dead." Naomi thought for a while, then decided it wouldn't hurt to offer some assistance. "You could always call her from my house and let her know where you are." "Thanks, Naomi," he said as he started up the car. "It's very kind of you." "What are friends for?" she replied with a smile. Pulling out of the hospital grounds, Mulder glanced across at her and returned the gesture. He was so glad this lovely young woman had entered his life. She was a breath of fresh air, clearing away all the cobwebs from his cluttered mind, like a little ray of sunshine that was able to shine through the dark clouds that had hung over him for so long.